Gaza War, day 363. Lebanon War, day 17, October 3rd, 2024. It's been a few days, you guys. It's been a few days. I was last here, what, the day before Operation True Promise 2, and I was explaining to you patiently why Iran might not be getting directly involved. Then, more or less, after I uploaded, Iran got directly involved and launched another barrage, an incredibly successful barrage. Nobody knows. Israel has highly censored the result of the barrage, but there's evidence of damage, especially to Nevatim Air Base. Various pieces of circumstantial evidence have been put together that they took quite a bit of a hit, and they're censoring it very, very, very intensely. So I'm sure you guys all know this deal, but I'll tell you a little bit more about it. But first, I wanted to talk about Teledyne, Palestine Action, apparently, allegedly, destroyed, contaminated a room that makes some very sensitive parts for the F-35. F-35s may have been destroyed in the Iranian attack on Nevatim Air Base, so generally not a great week for F-35s. From what I've heard, the F-35 is just a boondoggle, not just a boondoggle, but quite a bit of a money suck and very sensitive to conditions in need of constant maintenance and very expensive. And so maybe no week is a good week for the F-35, but certainly this week has not been a good week for the F-35. On the other hand, the F-35 has been effectively used to commit atrocities, including in Lebanon today. I get ahead of myself. Houthi. Syed Abdel Malik al-Houthi, Badruddin al-Houthi gave his Thursday address. It was mostly an extended eulogy for Hassan Nasrallah. He talked a lot about what Nasrallah meant to the world and to the Ummah as a Muslim, fellow Muslim leader. Al-Houthi wanted to make sure that that was a big part of what he talked about. Yemen, in other news, also did a bunch of resistance actions. They hit Tel Aviv again with a Yafa drone, an unmanned drone, sea drone, I guess, a boat basically with explosives that they've talked about before. It hit the Cordelia Moon, a British oil tanker. There's some pretty amazing footage of them trying to stop it from hitting the tanker before it hits the tanker. Now, back to True Promise, the ramifications of Iran's missile attack are still happening. Israel has promised they were going to hit Iran. Iran said, if you hit us again, we will hit you back much harder this time. Instead of 200 missiles, which is what they launched on the 1st of October, it'll be 1,000. The missiles they sent went through. They were hypersonic ballistic missiles, and or maybe just true hypersonics that maneuver while flying, and they got through pretty much. They got to whatever they wanted to hit. It's pretty clear they hit. There's so much video of them landing on the ground, to the point where Mikey from Tanky Therapy said something like, the Israelis had 100% interception rate if you count the ground. So very, very successful attack and proof of concept. There is no conceivable way that the Americans can put a missile shield in place that can stop Iran from hitting Israel wherever they want. So when Iran says the next time will be worse, the next time will be worse. That's just the reality at this point. And all the Gulf states, interestingly, Saudi Arabia, but also the UAE and Qatar and everybody, they've said they won't allow the US to use their bases to shoot down missiles or to interfere with Iran or for an attack on Iran. They're basically trying to tell Iran that they're not unfriendly, they're not going to take the American side. Jordan did, but for the most part, they're trying to say we're not, they're not, they don't want any of this. They don't want any of this battle. And Iran has been pretty explicit in threatening them. The Iraqi resistance has threatened them. They've been threatened a lot by the axis of resistance. And they did play a big role in trying to defend Israel from Iran in April. And Iran has completely changed their tone after the assassination of Nasrallah and the immense campaign against Lebanon. There's really, I mean, Pezeshkian, the president of Iran, he reiterated in a meeting in Qatar today that he had been lied to. He said they told me that they were going to do a ceasefire. Apparently, there's a news item that's gone around today that Lebanon government had agreed to a 20-day ceasefire, as in Hezbollah and the Lebanon government had agreed to a 20-day ceasefire with Israel, provided that Israel also did a 20-day ceasefire on Gaza. So there was some kind of negotiation happening, which I'm sure Iran knew about. So there was a lot going on, but I don't know that anybody believed it in the axis of resistance, given the way that the US and the West has behaved. On the other hand, the Axis's position has always been a ceasefire is a victory. If there's a Gaza ceasefire, we stop. But this is the point, I think. Iran, when they launched these True Promise missiles, they said, and they've followed it up by saying, the era, this is an amazing phrase. They said, the phase of unilateral restraint is over. That's a major announcement. It is a recognition that Iran has been, and the Axis in general, has been willing to absorb immense humanitarian and human catastrophe for the sake of the possibility of de escalating and reaching some kind of peace, ceasefire, for the sake of ending the suffering of the people of Gaza. And they've come to the conclusion correctly that there will be no deal. The West will be backing genocide to the end. Israel will be going to war to the end. And Iran basically said, if you don't restrain them, we will. And if you hit us back, we will. They said the response will be unconventional and will target infrastructure. I mean, as an aside, nobody knows for sure. But if you look at the confidence with which Iran has been acting, just over True Promise and since, it seems to me something has changed. Maybe they got the nuclear test results that they wanted, because knowing that the US/Israel have nuclear weapons, and many of them are utterly insane and willing to use them on Tehran, it seems to me that Iran wouldn't have taken this action if they didn't know that they had a nuclear umbrella of their own. And that means one of their own. That means they're not under Korea or Russia's nuclear umbrella, but they have their own. And, if you ask people from Iran, if you talk to people in Iran, that everybody, I mean, I was talking to somebody from Iran and he kind of laughed at me because I said, wouldn't it make sense for Iran to have nuclear weapons? And he said, why do you think they don't have them? So I think, Sina's called it like an open secret. And it does seem like their posture is one of someone who's not afraid anymore. And I mean, it's like Nasrallah, analyzing Nasrallah's speeches as closely as we did on this channel for the past year. Nasrallah was always the one saying they act like they're crazy, they act like irrational, but they don't have what it takes to invade Lebanon, and that's why they haven't done it. He said that many times. And he said they are deterred, and they killed him, and now they're invading Lebanon, and whether they have what it takes or not, and we'll talk about that fairly quickly. And I think they're going to attack Iran as well, and they're going to get this hit back that Iran promised. They're going to get this hit back much harder that Iran said they were going to do. And Iran um, will respond unconventionally and target infrastructure. And I think that, people have said it would be great if the US would take this into account and stop underestimating Iran and the axis of resistance, but it seems to be a structural problem in the analysis of white supremacists. The smart white supremacists have always known that they're not actually superior, but most of the white supremacists don't actually know that. And when you look at all going back to the 19th century literature, the imperialist literature, the smart imperialists said, we're not man for man, pound for pound. We're not smarter. We're not stronger. There's nothing magical about us, but it's very important that our enemies think that we are. And I do think there are people in Israel who know this, but I don't think the followers of this ideology know. And I don't think the settler leaders know, like the Smotriches, and I don't even think Netanyahu knows. I think Netanyahu thinks he's part of a racially superior group of people that can do whatever they want if they will it hard enough. The other thing about True Promise, there's something I want to say that's a little bit irritating, which is I've done a meticulous study, if I do say so myself, over several years of nonviolence in history. Specifically, I did a 3-part article on your the the two favorite examples of nonviolence and the let me see if I have a link to it. Yeah, I do. Okay. So here are the 3 parts, okay? The first one is I'll just show you. I'll show you on the screen, okay? The first one is asking the oppressed to be nonviolent is an impossible standard that ignores history from back in 2023. The next one is from April. The myth that India's freedom was won nonviolently is holding back progress. And another one from April, the conclusion, Palestine 2018 proved the futility of anti-colonial nonviolence. So in all of these articles put together, in the one about India, I proved that the Indian independence struggle was not a nonviolent struggle, despite the myths about Gandhi and Gandhianism. Gandhianism played a part, nonviolence played a part, but a lot of those nonviolent activists also organized violent armed struggle for independence before, during, after their Gandhian activities. The one called Asking the Oppressed to be Nonviolent was focused on America and focused on the civil rights movement in America and how that was large parts of it were armed, notably the Deacons for Defense, but not only the Deacons for Defense. There were armed members of there were armed people from armed local people protecting the nonviolent coordinating committee activists in the South. It was a blended strategy, let's say, of violent and nonviolent, armed and unarmed struggle. So your favorite 2 nonviolent examples, the civil rights movement in India, uh, Indian independence movements, were both fundamentally violent struggles. There are no nonviolent struggles in history. In the 3rd article, I think it was the 3rd article, or maybe the Scam of Nonviolence, I went through a database. There's a famous database that compiled all the hundreds supposedly of nonviolent struggles, but I looked at it in a lot of detail. You'll see in my Substack, and I showed that actually those are ahistorical, incorrect. Violent episodes are characterized as nonviolent episodes. Failures of nonviolent struggle are characterized as successes, and basically it's a completely corrupted database that's being presented there. All of which is to introduce the point, which is that a whole bunch of non-violence people kind of crawled out of the woodwork, and they're solid people. I'm not going to name their names or anything, but people said things on Twitter like Netanyahu is salivating after Iran laid waste to Israel's airbase, military airbase. Netanyahu's salivating, really? People said now Netanyahu's got exactly what he wants, the pretext that he wants. Really? Netanyahu was sitting there waiting for a pretext? What pretext did he use to assassinate Nasrallah? What pretext did they use? This is not how pretexts work. When the US or Israel wants to assassinate somebody, when they want to commit genocide, they start the genocide and then they make the pretexts later. The pretexts are not for the consumption of the people they're genociding. The pretexts are for the consumption, for local consumption, to generate additional bloodlust, to generate some degree of morale and hatred. I've covered some of this in World War I propaganda in my historical podcast. There's a number of reasons they do it, but the idea that Netanyahu can't go and commit genocide in Lebanon or Gaza unless there's a pretext, unless Iran does something, how does that work? Why doesn't that work the other way? Why don't we say, oh, Netanyahu has gone and done it now? He's given Iran the excuse they needed. I mean, if anything, that makes more sense because Iran has been trying to manage the escalation in a way that Israel has not. Israel is trying to has been trying to just establish racial dominance through insane levels of bloodshed and genocide. So it just doesn't behoove people, I don't think, to try to make an appeal to nonviolence a year of genocide, after the United Nations Security Council has been totally blown off. The ICC has said they were going to issue warrants. Remember that a couple months ago? And then they just disappeared. Sleeping Beauty came out, and as Alon Mizrahi calls Karim Khan, and said he was issuing warrants, and then Sleeping Beauty just went back to sleep and nobody knows or cares anymore again. The International Court of Justice came and gave an order for provisional measures. Nobody cared. The International Court of Justice came and said that the occupation was illegal and armed resistance was justified. Nobody cares. So what is this? What was supposed to happen? What was Iran supposed to do? This is not a serious person that I'm mentioning, and I know many of you know who he is. He said that Iran or Lebanon or whoever should have used the transformative power of shame. They should have shamed Israel. I think we're a little past that. So uh, the nonviolence myth really should have died 6 years ago in Gaza. It would have been better if it had never been so entrenched in our culture, the idea that you can decolonize non-violently against a genocidal opponent. It's so damaging, it's so counterproductive to do that, because all you end up doing is just finding another way to demonize the colonized and say, oh, they're not resisting the right way, as if following the instructions of nonviolence that were never followed including by the very movements that are supposedly the icons of nonviolence, as if that following those dictates could liberate Palestine. It can't, it won't. So yeah, I just wanted to clear that out of the way. And if you want to know more, you can read articles about it on my Substack, and the references there, they're pretty carefully referenced to lots of historical references on the relevant movements. There, I'm not the first person to say this, at least not about these movements in particular. You can follow up if you're interested. My point is this is not a this is not a problem that can be solved through nonviolence, okay? Now, after True Promise, after the Iranians hit their military targets in Israel with full contempt for the Iron Dome and the David Sling and the Arrow anti-missile systems and whatever the Americans had put in place, all the layers that they had at land and sea and allies, everybody, they shot down a couple of missiles and most of them just went exactly where the Iranians sent them to. Israel responded with a big massacre in Gaza. They bombed Syria, Damascus. Apparently they're saying it was near a Russian base. Russia, there's a whole history that I'll maybe one day when there's more time talk about on this channel. Stalin supported the creation of Israel. The Soviet Jews went to Israel en masse. They would rather have gone to Germany or the US, but Germany and the US colluded with Israel to make sure that the Soviet Jews couldn't go there to either of those countries, and they forced them to go to Israel instead. Russia has is restrained. Turkey committed terrorist attacks against Russia over the Syria war. Israel bombs Syria all the time. Russia's an ally of Syria's, prevented them from falling to ISIS in 2015. But in general, Russia's position is like, we'll protect you from ISIS, but not from Israel. Your war with Israel is none of our business. That's Russia's position to Syria. So Israel has been bombing Syria, a Russian ally, with no consequences, like forever. In the 10 years since Russia intervened in Syria to save them from ISIS, Israel has just continuously bombed Damascus, and Russia's stayed out of it. And I don't expect any of that to change. Russia has a deal with Iran. I'm sure they're interested in how the missile battle plays out against American missile defense. There are Russian air defense assets deployed in Iran. So when Israel attacks Iran, when America attacks Iran on behalf of Israel, they will face the Russian missile defense, the S-400 and other layered air defense that Russia has put in place that Iran and Russia have put in place over Iran now. And I'm sure the Russians will be studying what happens there very carefully. The Russians are probably there operating the equipment because it takes a while to figure out how to operate this very complicated air defense, missile defense, and air defense, and hypersonic missiles, and um, air war. This is the cutting edge. I mean, there's space too, but they're not distinct exactly. But air and space warfare is the absolute cutting edge of technology today. And the Russians and the Americans are the best in the world. And they're both very interested, I'm sure, in seeing how this plays out and watching. They're also fighting in Ukraine almost directly. So this is another theater where Russia is helping Iran, helping the resistance on the one hand, but also not, also, let's say, giving Israel a lot of leeway in terms of what they're letting them do to, including to their allies. You know, they'll wag a finger and tell them to stop, but Israel pushes the boundaries all the time in terms of pushing Russia and seeing what Russia will let them get away with. And what they'll let them get away with in Syria is quite a lot. And again, Russia, it's not Russia's as the pro-Russian people will tell me. It's not Russia's job to liberate anybody else. Russia has problems of their own, and the alliances are delimited, right? Russia has an interest in not letting Syria fall, and they have an interest in not letting Iran fall. The interest in terms of the plight of the Palestinians, it's not there. They don't. That's not, they're as humanitarian as the next guy, but that's not really where their concern is. So I guess I gave you a little bit of the long and convoluted history right now, but there's more. There's much more to say about it. It's just now is not the time. So Israel bombed Syria. Israel did a huge massacre in Gaza, and tonight and yesterday they've been bombing Beirut again, big time. I've seen some people arguing that they're looking for the potential successor to Hassan Nasrallah, Hashim Saifuddin, but he hasn't been elected. They don't know where he is. Maybe they're just bombing everything. They just bomb everything. Whether they're targeting a specific person or not doesn't really. It's rather immaterial at this point. Um, if they kill another important leader of Hezbollah at this point, it's not going to make any difference for them in terms of how this war goes. And I think that's been made clear by what's happened on the front and in terms of the missile war as well, as I'll get into, I promise, pretty soon. Let's just finish up the other fronts. West Bank, huge airstrikes in the West Bank. There was a huge one in Tulkarm. They killed more than 20 people. So they're stepping up their bombing in the West Bank. West Bank, they're referring to it as a massacre. The Palestinian factions are calling for extending and strengthening the uprising in the West Bank in the face of these big aerial massacres. So aerial massacres now is just what they do everywhere. West Bank, Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, wherever. That's their thing now. In Gaza, the resistance Qassam brigades reported and sent video. There's a couple of videos now, new videos, one from Khan Yunis of a very complex multi-stage operation against a large number of vehicles. I mean, the footage, the camera on the fighter who's basically, as far as I can tell, getting strafed by machine gun fire from these armored vehicles and just coolly stepping up, shooting, hitting his target and leaving. I don't really understand how some of these things are humanly possible, but they're right there on video to watch. Um, and yeah, Khan Yunis and Rafa, I'm sure you'll see them next week on Electronic Intifada's live stream on Wednesday. John Elmer will take you through those. So, okay, now let's talk about the past couple of days of Lebanon. The ground war has begun in Lebanon. And when I say the ground war has begun, I don't want you to think that the ground war, the I think there's a big armored push coming, but it's been preceded by a series of probes, special forces, infiltrations. Israel's done these kinds of things many times before. So they're trying to send smaller groups of men into specific villages. And if they could have pulled this off, there's a really effective thing they can do where if they can get into a number of places at once and then simultaneously make a bigger armored push or do some major bombings, then they could have a lot of success through this method of infiltrating small groups. It's something that the Rwandan Patriotic Front, another American allied army in Africa, the people led by Paul Kagame and over the past 30 years, it was their favorite method. That's how they took over Rwanda in 1994. It's how they infiltrated and fought in the Democratic Republic of Congo since 95, 96. and took at various points they took parts of eastern Congo using this method. It's like an infiltration warfare. They come in small groups, and then there's some big signal, usually an assassination or some other kind of bombing, and then all those groups that are in place already can make their move, take their objectives, destroy their opposition, etc. So when it you can foil this if you can catch the individual infiltrators and take them out before they can get into place or when they're getting into place. And that seems to have been what's happened in the past, over the past 2 days. So I made a little map in Quantum GIS, and I'll just show you what I mean. So the four towns that we're talking about are Edessa, which I think in this map is called Adesit Marjayun, Aitarun, Yarun, and Marun al Ras. You can see they're on the border. This is the border. I'm dragging this hand along the border. You can see Malkia, Avivim, Yiron on the other side of Yarun. These are all, this is the border between Israel and Lebanon. Margaliot, Yuval, you've been hearing about these places getting shelled from Lebanon. Lebanon has been hitting these targets. Majd al-Shams, right? You've heard these targets have been struck from Lebanon for this this whole year. They've all been getting hit. And wait, and then this is all Aitarun, Marun al-Ras, Yarun are all in the vicinity of Bint Jbeil, and the big battle of the 2006 war was in Bint Jbeil. So Israel's been trying to go into these areas, and then a little bit farther north up here in Adissa, and they've been caught. Basically, their infiltration, their small groups, their special elite forces have been caught and destroyed in the process of trying to do this infiltration. So I think, assuming they have a plan that makes sense, and there's no reason to think they don't have a plan, their plan would probably be infiltrate, 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 get into place, get into position, and then it could be to do a major push somewhere where they already have their troops ready. It looks like somewhere here, but maybe it'll be up here. It'll be somewhere. They don't want to necessarily go all the way up a hill where Hezbollah is waiting for them. So maybe they'll try to avoid some of the obviously higher elevation areas in their initial attack and take some lower elevation areas first, or that would probably make some kind of sense. So that is likely their concept here. The problem they've run into is yesterday at Odessa, there's a report from Hezbollah describing what happened yesterday at Odessa, which they said, I'll read you, I'll summarize much of it, but I'll read you a lot of it. You've probably seen some news of this already, but the fighters of the Islamic resistance monitored in the early hours of Tuesday morning reconnaissance movements of the Israeli enemy army in an uncovered area opposite the town of Odessa. In the context of reconnaissance of a possible path of advance for the enemy soldiers, the fighters did not confront the reconnaissance force at first and let it complete its mission and return. Based on the movements and behavior of this force, the fighters were able to set up an advanced ambush in the Odessa area in southern Lebanon. The resistance fighters laid their ambush while waiting for the elite forces to enter and take up positions in one of the houses in the area. This is one of the things I noticed about the July 2006 war, where Hezbollah seems to have a very good intuition for where the Israelis are going to, what house they're going to choose to set up in, what road they're going to choose to come up, what paths they're going to take, and where they're going to likely be when they kind of kick up their feet and relax. And they just seem to really know the Israelis really well in all of those ways. And so, likewise here, the resistance fighters laid their ambush. At dawn on Wednesday, an elite force from the Israeli enemy army, numbering more than 30, so that's not a huge group, right? That's what, a platoon, I guess, um, began silently infiltrating the ambush area. Upon the arrival of the Israeli elite force to the point of ambush, it was confronted by the resistance fighters with a call of Labaik, Ya Nasrallah. The fighters rained down barrages of bullets from their light weapons, machine guns, and rocket shells on the invading force. It reached point blank. The clash resulted in many dead and wounded among the ranks of this force, to the point that the soldiers were met with the number of their dead and wounded and began to scream and wail. The close support groups targeted the enemy's supply lines, targeting the settlements of Misgav Am, Kfar Galadi, and Metula. So that's the immediate other side of the border of this village. So they're just hitting directly across. This hindered the support for the targeted infiltrating force. Then the Israeli Air Force intervened on the border via helicopters. The helicopters intervened to comb the area with the aim of withdrawing the dead and wounded, and the enemy began to fire smoke bombs. And they also took down a helicopter. So, unlike Hezbollah, unlike Hamas, Qassam, which never fires at medevac helicopters, it does not seem to be the case that Hezbollah feels as strongly about this as Qassam does. And well, that is what it is. So now, Aitarun and Kafar Kila, same story yesterday. Now, today, we have Marun al Ras and Yarun, which I just showed you. So that's a little farther south. Let me show you again. Let's just put that back on the screen for you. That's all here. Yarun, Marun al Ras. And this time, what happened was the Golani Brigade also trying to infiltrate, and they got hit by what's called a sigil explosive device on the road. So maybe they felt like they had learned from the ambush and they were going to do something different from what happened at Odessa, and they were driving in, and then they got blown up by IEDs. Or, not necessarily improvised, but they got hit by explosive devices implanted on the road. And Hezbollah said that those were implanted hours before, they weren't sitting there booby trapped for a long time. They had just been planted again because Hezbollah seems to know very well the directions and vectors of attack that the Israelis are going to follow. Ali Jazini, who's a highly recommended Lebanese military analyst. He's been on Free Palestine TV. He was on the Wartime Cafe with Laith Marouf. And he writes in Arabic, but just go to hisx.com, Ali Jazini, and just hit that translate button. And he said something important. He said, the Israelis are very determined now. They're going to invade and they're going to come in large numbers. So these infiltrations that have been repelled, they're not the main attack. The main attack is still coming. The Israelis are not, they're very determined. There's tremendous pressure on them to advance. They will be advancing. So don't be demoralized by them taking these villages or setbacks like that when they announce that they're there. Remember, I just read you, I just ended my last thing with Basil Araj, but Ali Jazini is making the same kind of caution. Um, you got to be steady when things are going in the when things are going well for the resistance, the same way you've got to be steady when there's a setback. And right now, right on the border, the infiltrating groups have been repelled. But if they do, they're bombing the hell out of Beirut again. And if they do some kind of what they call the belt of fire, so they roll or a rolling thunder, whatever it is, they advance behind a whole lot of bombardment. Hezbollah will hunker down and wait for the bombardment to be over before they engage by getting as close to the enemy as possible and following all of the other principles of guerrilla warfare that have stood them in such good stead in 2006. They're with a higher degree of armament and better, in particular, better anti-tank weapons than um, Qassam is able to produce locally in Gaza because Hezbollah is able to get them from other supply lines. So, okay, that's where we are. That's the sit rep. That's the situation. The big armored push, I believe, will still come, and they will likely push into Lebanon. They'll get deeper than they've gotten, and then the guerrilla war will begin, and there'll be even more destruction. I did not expect this kind of ability to repel the invasion. I expected the Israelis to walk in and then start facing guerrilla warfare. But this is uh, this is not a inspiring opening, but the Israelis have plenty left to throw at the resistance. So we'll see. Um, we'll see how that develops. Also, as I said, I think it's very likely that Israel will hit Iran and then be hit even worse in turn. So we are definitely at the beginning. If you follow the pattern of, you can look at the 2006 war when the Israelis were forced to withdraw, but I actually think people are rightfully looking at the Rafah invasion as more like what Israel's likely to do here. They go in, they take a lot of hits, they take a lot of damage, and they just keep going in, and they just keep going in, and they announce various victories, and they drive around, and they get killed, and they keep moving in and committing atrocities through aerial attack. So this is a pattern they could continue while they have the resources to continue, and the Americans will continue to give them the resources to continue this, um, while the Americans have the resources to do that. I don't think those resources are infinite, but it's gonna go on for a while. And hitting Iran back and forth could accelerate Israel's collapse because there's a lot of infrastructure that can be destroyed in a really dedicated attack by Iran. And I think the thing about True Promise 2, more so than True Promise 1, was that it's very clear that Iran can hit its targets now. The ambiguity of the interception, the fact that Iran got a few missiles through in April was one thing, but this time they got anything they wanted through, and that's how it's going to be next time too. So It's an explosive situation. It's an exploding situation. And I don't see it being contained at all anytime soon. So, as we always say, hang in there, and we'll see you in the next one.